I'm extremely passionate about highlighting the success of African cannabis in the global arena, and I'm fortunate today to have Luke van der Ness from MG Health Lesotho, where he's currently based in the UK, talking about the journey they went through, the challenges that they faced, and the stigmas they had to overcome to get successful EU GMP accreditation for their flower to be shipped into German markets. Be sure to stay on to the end where we're going to be talking about extraction activities envisioned for the future for those markets, as well as an awesome facility video taking you through MG Health. Hi Luke, it's awesome to have you on today representing MG Health, obviously based out of the UK. But before we get into a discussion about MG Health and its activities, I'd like to find out a bit more about how you got into your engagement with the cannabis plant and the industry, and what you do on the day-to-day as the head of business development for MG Health.
Thanks, Jeff. Good to be chatting to you. Look, in terms of what my role is or what I do from the day to day, I mean, if you could tell me, that would be great once you find out. It's one of those roles and one of those industries where, every day is different, and you're really just trying to work out, how we move things forward in an industry like this, which is fantastic. It's been exciting. I originally actually studied accounting and finance in South Africa, back home, and was working in Joburg when I started looking at sort of doing another level of education, and I actually applied to a master's to the University of Geneva. It was a master's in commodity trading. It's an industry where you don't necessarily need a master's, but it was a kind of a way in. I wanted to get into the physical trading of commodities, and I got into the master's. And the structure of it is that you do the master's, but you're required to do an internship with one of the trading houses based in Geneva. So I'd gotten in, but I was now sort of kicking around trying to find someone to employ a South African kid on that side of the world, and spoke to one of the shareholders of MG Health, one of the founder shareholders actually, who dealt with them sort of a couple of times before. And I'd actually been badgering him about this project for a long time when it got going. And touched base with him and said, listen, I don't know if you know anyone who I should speak to, or if you've got anyone to chat to that might help me out. And he said, look, to be honest, it's a very interesting time for this cannabis business, which was exciting news for me because, as I said, I had been badgering him. So we are at that point that we were still very much in build phase and development phase, but, we need sort of a youngster that we can send over to Europe and can just start trying to work out, where's our market, where do we sell this product, what are the prices, and just begin that discovery. So he asked me to come have a look at the farm and then meet the team and take it from there. So I went up to Lesotho, and it just blew me away, to be honest. I was incredibly impressed by the team and what had been built there and the whole story behind it. I mean, when you go there, you just get a feeling that there's something special being done here. And sort of things developed and conversations continued, and it sort of reached crunch time. And the company said, look, we're not in the position where we can put someone through a master's. It's very early stage, and we need someone full time in this role. So, chat to us after the master's, and maybe we can have a look at it. And I made the call to actually just forego it and jump in with 2 feet into the cannabis industry. And I've never looked back. It's been an incredible journey. That was about 3 years ago now, or almost 3.5, when we began this process. And here we are today, and we finally sort of are moving, and there's a need for someone in sort of sales and business development.
No, perfect. Well, you know what? That's exactly right. You got to jump in. I come from a technical background as well, and it was one of initially a bit of skepticism. I'd known of the benefits personally, but it was one of those things where it was like, is there real industry here? And I think that's been demonstrated through and through from the US. The numbers have been quite staggering for the US as well as Canada, and seeing what's happening for patient access globally, and hopefully responsible adult use in the future, should really open up the benefits of this as a realistic alternative for mood management, besides beverages, alcoholic beverages specifically. So besides the medicinal, but today we're going to focus on the medicinal side. And tell me a bit about MG Health in terms of their journey, a bit of the thinking behind, obviously the news broke in 2017, and that's where things really started to move. Talk me through a bit on the journey side and to where you are today.
Sure. So, look, it's been an unbelievable journey. We're sort of in the right place, right time in the beginning, and we've ridden the ups and downs that most people have in this industry, all sort of off the back of the Canadian legalization. So right in the beginning, Andre Botman, who's our CEO, he's third generation Lesotho, and his team on the ground got the operation going, and then Canadian legalization happened, and there was a Canadian listed company who came down, and things got going then. And at that point, everybody thought that the world was going to open up. It was a matter of weeks and months before the whole world was going to take cannabis in. But and it was set up for extracts principally at that point, with the intention that we were going to then supply extracts back in bulk to Canada for processing. That obviously never materialized. Health Canada hasn't given an import permit yet. So the sort of business model had to sort of shape and mold with the industry, which we did, and sort of then developed and started looking at the European markets as sort of where probably our next point of call would be and the point of access. And luckily made the call very early on, before it became the sort of buzzword that's without EU GMP, we're going to be wasting our time. So we began that expensive and terrifying process. And that sort of got going. And then our next speed bump was basically COVID, which sort of changed the profile and our plans quite significantly. We were actually in the middle of a raise in March 2020, which was a fantastic time to be raising capital to sort of our next round. And at that point, we actually canceled the raise. We tightened everything up, tightened up the strategy. At that point, we were looking to get our extract and flower GMP done at the same time. But there was a ton of capital, particularly on the extraction side, that was going to be required to validate and finalize those processes. So we sort of tightened the belts, went to shareholders, and focused on flower first. Got that done, and are now getting to the point where we want to look at extracts. Our main market that we focus on has always been Germany. It's always been sort of the target, I think, along with everyone else. Whilst we wait for everyone to catch up. And sort of that's where we are now, and still just trying to keep going and hope that we can keep moving forward along with everyone else in this game.
Yeah, no, look, trust me, EU GMP for extraction is full GMP environments, which means it is quite intense in that process. So to that EU GMP for, shipment of flower, I mean, this broke in April last year in 2021, where you guys had successfully, slammed that almost elusive goal of getting the EU GMP cannabis cultivation facility. And for context, there's only a handful actually in South Africa that has that status as a traditional pharmaceutical company, and that includes your big ones like GSK, Aspen, Laxa, the assortment there. So well done on that, firstly. But now, from that relationship with Drapalin, could you give us a bit of context on how that's going, how that's been evolving, and then obviously I know we're going to come around to extraction and discuss that some more.
No problem. Yeah, so look, Drapalin have been fantastic partners for us in that market. It was during those early days where we were running around Europe trying to find out where the hell we were going to sell this product eventually that we came across Drapalin amongst another number of distributors in Germany and Europe at large. And sort of, we were there from a country that a lot of them have never heard of before, telling them that we were about to get EU GMP. And it was... Not many of them believed us, I'll be honest. And but Drapalin they at least believed us enough to get on a plane and come down and meet the team on the ground, and were suitably impressed when they arrived there with the sort of the pharmaceutical experience that's on the ground, the team that's there, and what had been put into this build in the mountains. And as I said, there's a special kind of magic there that you've got to see and feel. But so from that day, they realized, this is something that's going to work out, or we think we can work out, and they then worked with us to get to EU GMP. We had a couple audits from them, gap analysis, and we worked really, really closely with them to sort of get into the market. They're based in Munich, in the state of Upper Bavaria, which is known as one of the stricter states, but they've got an incredibly strong relationship with the regulators there, and they're really starting to build out the sort of front-end platform. But it was a 2-year journey with them, really, to get to the point of actually bringing the first product from Lesotho into pharmacies in the European Union, or in Germany specifically.
Yeah, you bring up a good point there, specifically around the partnership, because very often I get the phone call where it's like, I want to do EU GMP, that's what my, the company's ambitions might be, and I'll be like, understand the importance of partnerships. It needs to be like, why should we be engaging with you? Why you can pay for those services. You can try to get regulators out to remote locations like in Africa. But it really comes back to that partnership building. And maybe this ties in the next question I have for you around, challenges around going for EU GMP is something I want to ask you about. naturally they would have been somewhat like 80% of those challenges would have been negated by having a strong partner that has, like you said, does gap analysis, makes an assessment, has someone come out from the state's position to look on behalf of bee farm at like how things are developing. Can you go into maybe one or two challenges that were quite apparent, maybe, or that came up in hindsight in once you entered into this discussion?
Yeah, look, I mean, to be honest, from the commercial side of things, as a business development guy, GMP's hell on earth. It's huge. The torture to put yourself into it, and this is to build a manufacturing facility for any kind of medicine. You then combine that with the fact that you're based up in the mountains, that's pretty far away from most sort of services and infrastructure. You know, things like an HVAC is giving some problems. It's not a quick process. You've got to get someone to come across the border and come out and fix it. And then you add COVID to the mix of tests and that sort of a thing. So challenges basically from being where we are, you know, there's huge benefits to it, especially on the cultivation side and the purity of the environment. But it's on the GMP side, it did come with its challenges. But it comes down really to then just having active maintenance and just staying on top of things. But, for me, the best way I try to describe it sometimes to people that's, unlike yourself, they don't really have a pharmaceutical understanding and of, what this GMP actually means and why it's so big is, around the beginning, one of our executives at the time, a guy called Francois Ferreira, was at an industry conference in Israel. Now, at this point, we literally just had a license and a site and a dream, and we were trying to work. He was trying to get an understanding, and spoke to quite a prominent executive in the Israeli industry about what we were doing. Setting up this facility in Lesotho. We've got some Canadian investment, and it's low cost environment, beautiful, amazing place to grow, etc. Thinking he was going to get a positive response, when he was actually just met with a stony face and said, "Look, I'm going to be honest with you. You're wasting everybody's time. This is never going to work. It's never going to work in Africa. Maybe you'll get GACP, but there's no ways you'll get GMP, and there is impossible chance that you'll get EU GMP." So Francois came back from Israel and told us all that we were getting EU GMP, and that's now what the company's main goal is. and I think it's been fantastic that our narrative always that we felt, or the way that we felt, is that obviously this is great for us. It gives us access to the markets, but it's great for Africa, because that kind of attitude is just, you hate to see it, and it's just not true. I mean, you look at the pharmaceutical industry we've got down here in South Africa, for example, it's a generics powerhouse. And so I think people are sleeping on Africa and the contribution that we'll eventually make to this market. And I think so for what we've done, it's just the beginning, I would say, of getting through it, because we've got an understanding of these challenges down there, especially in the bottom of the continent. We get it. We understand GMP. We know it's hard, but I think it's something we can all really achieve and get going.
No, 100%. I like that story. I mean, also don't tell me you can't do it, because that gets you motivated and revved up to do things. And I mean, I look at this as well. I mean, South Africa's a good parallel. So is Australia, the TGA. Really, like, the Southern Hemisphere has a lot to offer to the Northern Hemisphere in terms of, not just bulk supply. I mean, I know for a fact, we've discussed this before, where you actually are doing pharmacy packing out there in Lesotho. So it's not just we're the bulk suppliers to the world. We really have some value-added services to add, and a very strong pharmaceutical sector within the whole of the Southern Hemisphere. And I think the Latin regions are also, Brazil is a good example of also very strict regulatory considerations in the region. So I think there's a lot that starts to, if you really give Africa a chance, there's good opportunity. It's often underwritten in terms of value, and that also provides an upside in terms of when it does come through successfully. And that's why it's awesome to have you on today to talk about MG. It's been long overdue, so for me to talk about MG Health is fantastic to highlight. I wanted to mention, obviously, an area that comes up a lot, and I hear this from cultivators, is trying to find the best strain, trying to get the new and best. And I think this is a very much a Californian and even like Barcelona, like the Spanish club model mindset. We know from a pharmaceutical background that stability of a product is really important in terms of success commercially, because no physician wants to provide a product for an indication or an unregistered indication in their mind and say, like, this is what I want to use it for, and then it keeps changing the product. The variability keeps swinging. Is that something that MG Health is also very focused on, is maybe stabilization of products, instead of having a plethora of options, really going for ones that work and that are commercially successful in the European market?
Yeah, it's massive. I think it's a massive aspect of it, Jeff, and I'm glad you mentioned is that, at the end of the day, specifically on flower, is you're taking a herbal product here, and all the sort of ups and downs and inconsistencies that come with it, and trying to fit it into a pharmacopoeial model or pharmaceutical model of what the specification is and how easy it is to miss that specification. I mean, to take a strain, for example, our Buffer King Choice strain in Germany is at 20%, and so that can vary between 18 and 22%. It's got a 10% variance, which is the pharmaceutical variance. But to apply that to crop that is so sensitive to all kinds of things in its environments and seasonal fluctuations, it really is incredibly hard at the best of times in a situation where you've got stabilized genetics and variety that have been around for decades. You've now got an industry where built on a base of, to find stable genetics in this industry is hard. There's a big difference between what people think is stable and what's an actual sort of stable variety would be if you compared it to, the citrus or any kind of industry such as that. And so, we've been through, and there's a constant process basically of pheno hunting. But the main focus really is that once you find a good pheno, the work really starts. And you've got to start stabilizing it and crossing it and trying to get it to a point where we can be confident that it's going to meet specification in the German market time and time again from a batch to batch situation. So, it's once again that push and pull between the front end, business development and sales side and cultivation. We've got some strains which are beautiful, and I'm super excited to take them to the markets, and we've been running them for 2 years. This is like the 7th or 8th generation of mother, and cultivation will still say, look, we're not happy with it. 2 years is too short. We want 5 years. So there's that push and pull between cultivation and sales. When's this thing ready for the market? When can we put it on stability trials? When can we, be sure of what we've got? So, it's the pheno hunting's got to happen, and it's great that it will happen. And there's a lot of good entities coming out that are focusing specifically on genetics and building stabilized genetics and genetic banks. And I think that is going to be a key facet of the industry. It'll start moving towards, at least on the cultivation side, similar to your traditional models of farming, where you've got nurseries and genetics, and then you've got production hubs, and you don't want the same facility or the same trying to do both. So as soon as I think the industry can rely on the genetics and the stabilized genetics, I think we will get there. It's just takes time, like all these things. It's going to be a big shift, particularly on the medicinal side, when you're meeting specifications.
Yeah. Now, talking about meeting specifications, I mean, this brings me to a question I've got to ask about testing, because I'm familiar with the testing labs that are out there in Lesotho. There's one in mind specifically that does really well. It's well capitalized around equipment. Besides, if it wasn't for that, I imagine it'd be extremely difficult to really establish yourself in the market to get that feedback, because your production success is kind of almost, you need that iterative process of like getting feedback on how's our potency looking, how is there, I'm not going to speak to any kind of the pesticides, but also when it's like shipping out, like, all those tests you have to do, and you've got to do a certain amount in-house to get your COAs in line, and then obviously when you send off, you'll be sending off a sample for rechecking in that market itself based on what their monograph might be for testing. What were some of the challenges you saw, particularly on the testing side? Because, I mean, that's not resolved as yet in South Africa even. I mean, we've got 2 accredited laboratories. We've got more that are in the works. But getting a PT scheme or proficiency testing between the labs is also a challenge, just to kind of get some consistency in terms of that space.
No, absolutely. It's another huge sort of piece of the industry that needs to be built and needs to be strong for actual production hubs to grow. Because, I mean, look, at the end of the day, we can test the product on this side and be happy with the COA, and you're sending it to a place like Germany. They obviously test it on their side, and the clients, analytical labs, are always going to be treated as a gospel, and then they're not going to, and that's what then goes into the market. So for cannabinoids and that sort of a thing, it's having the labs in Lesotho and Lucan being there it's been massive. Another place where it really shows its head, and it's almost more important, if not as important, is on the microbiological type of situation. So with the yeast and molds and the aerobic content, because what it allows you to do, look, it's an incredibly hard thing to manage if you're trying to put an unirradiated flower into the markets. And, to be able to stay on top of it, you require in-process testing. You can't just process, run a whole batch through cultivation into the facility, dry it, cure it, pack it, and then you've got to, hope that there's no micro in it. You need to know pre-harvest if there's been any microbial growth, or in-process testing and continual testing, and then especially post that, you need to know before you put it on a plane that you're 100% certain that there's nothing in there and it's not going to grow and develop as it goes to the other side. Because I think that's going to be, and I mean, it already has been a defining point and defining the sort of sector of the flower industry, is this irradiation, non-irradiation debates, and the presence of micro. And, there's different standards around the world. Israel's got different specs than Germany does versus New Zealand so it's that harmonization that doesn't exist, and it's just being able to be on top of it and trust the labs down here. So I think we've got pretty strong infrastructure, but to your point, it's all about harmonizations of the standards. And with something like this, it's a herbal medicine, it's more than just a standard. It's your sample preparation, it's how it goes through, which method you're using. So it's another sector of the industry. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how it plays out, but it's absolutely crucial for sure.
Yeah, no, this speaks directly to what I feel will shape the industry, which is product recall, specifically on label deviation that is acceptable and on microbials. I mean, that will, agreed. It's a tough call between irradiated and non-irradiated product. An easier call when it's a vulnerable patient subset. When you have a robust immune system, sure, you can live over a couple, But that all said, you've got to take it in context. And increasingly, I think there will be a push to a stronger standardization about what's acceptable. And often I see ministers and camera crews going through facilities without proper PPE. And I'm like, you're in a pharmaceutical business here. You can't just go around touching, if I were to use a parallel, like a vaccine product, go around. These are highly, you've got to have some controls. So absolutely, good points raised. To the next one. For me, I like that personal note you mentioned about, not being able to do it, not being able to drive a sector. A lot of people have said it, and I mean, I'm based in South Africa, so I probably have said this as well, where it could be more challenging to get, a EU GMP recognition in a territory outside of the existing PICS members. For anyone watching, PICS is basically 54 member states that form the Pharmaceutical International Cooperation Scheme. So what it means in essence is that all the members or all the regulators signed on to PICS recognize the same standards in terms of GMP. And this was a challenge for Canada, even going back from GPP, moving to GMP, starting to really harmonize around these things. And we've talked about mutual recognition agreements as well in terms of space. Like, how do we get a harmonized understanding of the standards? Because this, I think, would help a lot of people. And what were some of the, was it a real challenge to you in Lesotho not having PICS? Or was it one just of, we're going to have to really make sure that we do our own work, do our own kind of assessments of risk, and rely on that first and foremost, and not just the local regulator?
Yeah, basically that's exactly what it came down to, is adopting PICS as the minimum in terms of the way that you operate. But you've got this unique situation in cannabis, medical cannabis, where there's a sort of separation of EU GMP as this set as this gold standard. And look, it is extremely tough. But for every other pharmaceutical, you have these mutual recognition agreements, like PICS, for example, where the standards and the manufacturing standards are harmonized. In cannabis, it's now Germany has decided, or the most of Europe has decided, that it needs to be EU GMP or nothing else, although the TGA does have an MRA. But so with Lesotho not being a member of PICS, it was almost largely irrelevant, because it is still it's externally moderated and audited, and you've got these European standards being applied across the globe, in something that's actually in pharmaceuticals pretty unprecedented for something like that to happen with one without the other. So it's an amazing patchwork of regulations and quality standards at the moment. So I think it's another situation where harmonization is more of a when not if kind of situation.
Yeah, no, agreed. I mean, we're all waiting on the US to federalize or reschedule, because I'm pretty sure the FDA is already sitting with like the ASTME committees ready with a chapter on cannabis. I'm pretty sure the Germans are not far behind in terms of getting some kind of recognition around that. And I think it's needed, because it does take almost that, It's difficult sometimes to give accurate advice because you've got to choose from which parts of the pharmacopoeia you're applying yourself within chapters. So it'd be good to get some kind of universal agreement on these points. And also the GACP to GMP changeover is also one that requires quite a bit of consideration from a risk perspective. And I think it's always best to look at what your end application of your product and then base your risk profile for manufacturing on the finished application. That's always a good way to kind of think about, what's acceptable without overbilling yourself in terms of the cost of the facility. So this brings me to maybe on extraction. I know that you mentioned right in the beginning that there was that big Canadian push and a big focus initially on extraction. That dream obviously has not dissipated and left. I'm passionate about extraction as well. Maybe bring us up to speed as like, how are you seeing that market developing, and also for MG Health, is extract still a hot topic for the market? And, I think personally from an evolution of the industry over the next decade, I think people want to have that level of precision in dosing, at least physicians do. So maybe beyond just a general audience. How do you see it?
No, for sure. I think I couldn't agree more. Extraction is going to be what drives the market in the long term, specifically on the medical side. Whether it's inhaled extracts in sort of vape cartridges or whether it's taken orally, but it will drive all the progress. For us, it's closer than it's around the corner. To be honest, that dream never died, and we pretty much ordered ready, or think we'll be ordered ready by the middle of this year at the latest, and looking to have our first extracts into the German market by the third quarter. So if all goes well, these things, there's often speed bumps, but we're very excited to sort of take that next transitionary step. And the other thing that no one ever tells you is that look, flower is fantastic and we're passionate about what flower can do for patients, but geez, it's a lot easier to meet those specifications if you're controlling it with a formulation. So I think production is also quite excited for us to get extracts into the market and get that sector of it running. It is, in Germany specifically, a sector that's still got a lot of upside. It's still highly dominated by flower, that market, which was kind of drove our decision to initially focus on that anyway. But it's coming, it's gaining ground. What's been really interesting to see in that German market is how dronabinol has maintained such a strong share of the market in terms of the position. Everybody knows full spectrum is better than dronabinol, but it's just what I don't think people considered or predicted is that the fact that it's, it can be a generic and it's got the clinical trial backing, is that it's just clinicians are so much more comfortable with it. So it's more of a realization of clinicians are comfortable, and that'll drive growth and that'll get more patients getting their prescription, versus with knowing that full spectrum and full spectrum extracts up until the time when we do have clinical trials are always going to sort of have a little bit of a question mark with certain doctors in certain markets. But so we're excited about it. We think extracts obviously is going to be massive, and we're looking forward to hopefully having product in the market by the third quarter this year.
No, awesome. Sounds amazing. I agree with that point. It's about what a physician is comfortable with or a specialist is comfortable with. And we will see this evolution of even the extract market to include more and more terpenes more and more in the formulation, and that will set up the proprietary nature of what we know the pharmaceutical industry to be, is that it will become far more lucrative for companies to build around their proprietary formulations that are clinically assessed. And because the plant is so good at comorbidity, it makes it hard for clinical assessment, but it also makes it possible for some interesting label claims. The ability to put clinical effort behind a specific indication and demonstrating that with a successfully formulated product is going to be how I feel this market will eventually fully evolve, and we will really get to understand the science behind the benefits of the plant. And I think all lobbyists and everyone who's been pushing for access to the plant globally would not say, look, that's not a bad thing. Let the pharmaceutical industry do what it does, which is establish the science, what we already know to be universal truth. So, sometimes we have to put the 20 years in to establish the evidence for what many can already know is a positive outcome. But knowing the exact science is going to shape the industry. So, Luke, I can only say thank you so much for making your time available to discuss the progress at MG Health. I know that we're probably going to have you on for some new exciting updates, especially on the extract side. So thank you so much for your time. And I look forward to, having people see this episode and discussing the progress, because I think it's really set that almost light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to really what Africa can do in this space. So thank you so much for your time.
Agreed. No, thank you, Jeff. It was good to catch up. And yeah, we'll chat soon for sure.
Okay, awesome.
MG Health Limited, a vertically integrated producer of medicinal cannabis based at 2,000 meters above sea level in the pristine mountains of Lesotho. We operate on a single integrated site to ensure that we can guarantee quality and compliance with global pharmaceutical standards and implement our plant-to-patient philosophy. Our remote location, situated at the base of the Mohale Dam, allows us to produce premium cannabis far from the reach of airborne pesticides and contaminants, using clean water assisted by consistent natural sunlight and dry, fresh air. We built this facility with compliance and scale in mind. Strict adherence to pharmaceutical standards and processes is a part of MG Health's DNA, and it is something that we will never compromise on. This operational discipline is what led us to being the first medicinal cannabis company in Africa to be confirmed as compliant with the European requirements for good manufacturing practices, better known as EU GMP. The process begins with our carefully maintained mother plants and onto our cloning facilities before our specifically selected and stabilized strains are put through the cultivation process in environmentally controlled greenhouses. Harvested flower is then transferred to our clean air manufacturing facility where it is dried, cured, and either trimmed and packed for distribution or milled for further processing and extraction. We are a people-first organization and are fully focused on creating a positive impact on the lives of our community in Lesotho and patients around the world. Our formula for growth combines experienced personnel from a range of industries with young, ambitious talent. We are currently one of the biggest employers of BSc graduates in Lesotho and provide numerous jobs, education programs, and infrastructural development to Maraka Bay, the village that we call home. As a company that has always looked to start small, think big, and move quickly, MG Health is on a mission to lead the way in bringing quality cannabis-based medicines from the kingdom in the sky to patients that need them all around the world. MG Health, full spectrum science.